At this point, you probably don't need me to tell you that Scorn is a divisive title. The reviews and reception were all over the place. Personally, I gave it a 6 out of 10 in my review, which you can check out below if you really want to. And maybe you can argue that if I've already written a review, there's no real reason to make this video. But I really want to drill down into a few specific choices that I think tainted my experience with Scorn. In spite of what people on the internet would have you believe, I don't think a 6 out of 10 is actually a bad score. Truthfully, I think Scorn is worth checking out if you're into horror games. Visually, it reminds me a lot of Golden Corral. I know that low-end buffet is probably going to upset my stomach, but when I see those hallowed halls, I just can't stay away. Maybe I'm a glutton for intestinal punishment in the form of bad pizza and wet fleshy walls. Who's to say? Either way, Scorn nails the alien vibe it's going for. And if you're looking for some weird, sex-adjacent imagery that's going to leave most people disgusted and a few very excited, then this is definitely your game. However, mechanically, the game is a real letdown. I'm not talking about common complaints like the gunplay or weak puzzles either, though I have to point out that solving glorified sliding puzzles really took me out of the whole you're on an alien world thing. Instead, I want to look at how Scorn refuses to hold your hand and why the way they went about that kind of killed the whole thing for me. I'm really going to dig into one specific example in a bit, but I think this whole thing kind of permeates the experience and left me feeling pretty unsatisfied with the gameplay. See, Scorn wants to be like Space Dick Mist. While you're being grossed out by slimy, alien wall weenies, it's going to ask you to solve a bunch of puzzles without really explaining anything. On its own, that's not terrible. I mean, look at how rotten modern games have gotten, with signposting everything and taking out any sense of discovery. You just have to go back to God of War Ragnarok to see people complaining about AI oversimplifying things and not letting you figuring things out. That game also does the thing where you're not really solving environmental puzzles anymore because the next step in climbing up a gigantic mountain has a brightly colored border under it showing you where to go. I'm not specifically calling out God of War for either of those issues because tons of games have them, it's just the most recent. Scorn gets rid of this completely. You're given no hints about where to go or even told how most of the mechanics work. In general, I'm a fan of this type of design. It makes the process more natural and keeps the player immersed in the experience. Unfortunately, several times Scorn fails to do a good job of teaching through the gameplay. The best example of this actually comes from a late game puzzle, so spoilers I guess. I'm not sure if spoiling mechanics is taboo, but you've been warned. Right near the end of the game, your body is infested by a disease that covers your arm. You can't change your weapons or use your tools unless you use stations that cut the disease off your arm for a short time. There's one section of this where you need to cut the disease off and then run across a room to interact with another machine. Here's the problem. Up until this point, the game has never taught you how to run. Now I know what you're saying. Every game has a run button. Why are you so stupid? First of all, I never said I wasn't. But I will say that making an entire game where you never have to run and then forcing you to do it at the very end without ever introducing the mechanic beforehand is bad design. If Scorn put you in an earlier puzzle that taught you about running, then it would make perfect sense. I would have learned it and been done. The only time in the entire game that you need to run is at the very end. And as mentioned, there's a time-based puzzle involved that makes you think you're missing something in how the mechanic is designed. Here's the thing. It's not so much the idea that not noticing your run is a problem, it's that you shouldn't design a puzzle and then not show players all the tools in your tutorial. If I could run from the start, which I could, it should have been shown through an earlier puzzle. This design flaw permeates all of Scorn for me. It feels like the devs made this incredible looking world and then tried to slap a game around it instead of coming up with something that's fun to play and then building around that. To me, that's the opposite of a good game is made. I can look at a collection of H.R. Geiger-inspired drawings and say, wow, that looks so cool and gross. I want more from a video game because it's interactive. For me, this is where Scorn fails. It's great to look at, but it dragged to play almost from the jump because that part just doesn't seem to have been treated with the love and care that the vomit-inducing visuals were. Mechanically, it just doesn't know what it wants to be, tainting an otherwise great idea for a unique world that I would love to see more from. And maybe I just hate Myst. I don't know. Does Myst suck?